I will tell you something that may surprise you. At 101 years old, I have watched generations chase the idea of the perfectly balanced diet as if it were the final answer to health. Doctors talk about it, nutrition books praise it, governments build food pyramids and colorful plates around it, and for most of my life, I believed it too. But living for more than a century teaches you something strange about certainty. The longer you observe the human body, the more you realize that what sounds perfect on paper does not always behave perfectly in real life. When people say a balanced diet, they usually mean a careful mixture of nutrients, some carbohydrates for energy, some protein for muscles, some fats for hormones and the brain, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and a variety of foods from different groups, grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, and sometimes animal products. The idea is simple. If the body receives everything it needs in the right proportions, health should follow naturally, and in many ways, that thinking is sensible. But over the decades, I noticed something curious. People who followed the rules of balance very strictly did not always become healthier. Some became confused about food. Some ate more than their bodies truly needed. Others believed that as long as their plate looked balanced, the quality of the food did not matter. Even more interesting, the older I became, the more I realized that the human body is not a mathematical equation. Two people can eat the same balanced meal every day and experience completely different results. One thrives, the other quietly develops problems. So the question that slowly formed in my mind after nearly 100 years of watching people eat, age, struggle with illness, and search for the perfect formula was this. Could it be that even a perfectly balanced diet carries hidden risks? Not because balance itself is wrong, but because the idea of perfect balance can sometimes mislead us. To understand where the risks might hide, we must first understand what people mean when they talk about a perfectly balanced diet. When I was young, the idea was simple. A balanced meal meant a little of everything on the table: bread or potatoes for energy, vegetables for vitamins, a source of protein, perhaps beans or meat, maybe some fruit for sweetness and freshness. It was not a strict formula. It was more like a general guide. But over time, nutrition became more technical. Scientists began measuring calories, micronutrients, fatty acids, glycemic indexes, and many other details that ordinary people had never heard of before. Suddenly, balance was no longer just a sensible mixture of foods. It became a carefully calculated arrangement of nutrients. Carbohydrates had percentages, fats had recommended limits, proteins had target amounts per kilogram of body weight. In theory, this approach made perfect sense. The human body needs certain nutrients to function. If we provide those nutrients in appropriate amounts, the body should operate smoothly like a well-maintained machine. But the human body is not simply a machine. It is a living system shaped by genetics, environment, culture, stress, sleep, movement, and even emotional state. A meal that works beautifully for one person may quietly burden another. One of the first problems I began to notice with the idea of perfect dietary balance is that it can encourage people to focus on proportions instead of quality. If someone believes that the goal of eating is simply to maintain the right ratio of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, they may stop asking a much more important question: where are those nutrients coming from? I have seen people proudly describe their meals as balanced, even when much of the food came from boxes, packages, or factories. Technically, the numbers might look correct, The plate may contain carbohydrates, protein, and fat in appropriate proportions. But if those nutrients come from highly processed sources, the body receives far more than just those 3 macronutrients. It also receives additives, refined sugars, excess sodium, and substances the body was never designed to encounter regularly. In this way, the concept of balance can sometimes disguise poor food quality. Another hidden problem appears when people try to include every food group at every meal simply for the sake of balance. Many nutrition guidelines encourage variety, and variety can indeed be beneficial. Different foods contain different micronutrients, and a diverse diet can help prevent deficiencies. But in practice, the pursuit of constant variety can also lead to overeating. Imagine someone preparing a meal with grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy, protein sources, and healthy fats all at once. The plate becomes larger, the meal becomes heavier, and the body receives more calories than it actually needs. Because the meal appears balanced, the person may believe they are eating correctly, even if the total energy intake quietly exceeds what their body can comfortably use. Over many years, small excesses accumulate. Weight slowly increases. Metabolism struggles to keep pace, and the person may wonder how this happened while following what they believed was the healthiest possible diet. There is another issue that rarely appears in textbooks: individual biology. When I was younger, doctors often spoke as if human nutrition worked the same way for everyone. But as the decades passed, researchers began discovering how different our bodies truly are. Some people process carbohydrates very efficiently. Others experience rapid blood sugar spikes. Some individuals thrive on higher fat intake. Others feel sluggish when fats dominate their meals. Food intolerances, digestive sensitivities, and metabolic differences all influence how the body reacts to what we eat. A perfectly balanced diet, according to general guidelines, may still be poorly suited to a particular person's biology. For example, a meal considered nutritionally ideal on paper may contain grains, dairy, and legumes. For many people, this combination works well, but for someone with gluten sensitivity or lactose intolerance, that same meal could cause digestive distress, inflammation, or fatigue. The meal remains balanced in theory, but it is not balanced for that individual. Age also changes how our bodies respond to food. When I was 20 years old, I could eat large portions without thinking twice. My body burned energy quickly. Digestion was strong. Physical activity was effortless. But as decades passed, I noticed that my body began asking for something different. Heavy meals felt unnecessary. Excess sugar caused fatigue. Too many mixed foods in one sitting sometimes made digestion slower. The older I became, the clearer it became that nutritional balance must evolve with the stages of life. What nourishes a young athlete may overwhelm a 90-year-old digestive system. Another subtle risk comes from the psychological effect of rigid dietary rules. When people believe that every meal must follow a strict structure, precise ratios, specific food groups, exact nutritional targets, eating can become stressful. Food stops being a natural part of life and becomes a complicated calculation. Ironically, this stress can damage health in ways that nutrition charts cannot measure. Stress hormones influence digestion, blood sugar regulation, and immune function. When someone constantly worries about whether their meal is perfectly balanced, the mental pressure may undermine the very health they are trying to protect. During my long life, I have observed something interesting about the healthiest older people I have known. Many of them did not obsess over perfect nutritional formulas. They ate simple foods. They listened to their bodies. They maintained regular habits and moderate portions. Their meals were often balanced in a natural way, but not in a rigid or mathematical sense. So when I speak about the risks of a perfectly balanced diet, I am not suggesting that balance itself is harmful. Balance remains an important principle of good nutrition, but the idea of perfect balance can sometimes create misunderstandings. It can lead people to trust formulas more than their own bodies. It can encourage quantity over quality. It can ignore individual differences, and it can turn eating into something far more complicated than it needs to be. After watching human health unfold across more than a century, I have learned that the body rarely rewards perfection. Instead, it rewards awareness, simplicity, and adaptability. The longer I lived, the more I realized that the real danger of the perfectly balanced diet is not the balance itself. The danger lies in the illusion that health can be reduced to a fixed formula. Human beings love formulas. They make life feel predictable. If you follow the rules, you expect a guaranteed result. But the human body has never truly behaved that way. When I was in my 40s, a close friend of mine became deeply interested in nutrition. She read every book she could find. She measured portions carefully, tracked nutrients, and arranged every meal according to what experts described as ideal balance. Her breakfast had a precise mixture of carbohydrates, protein, and fats. Her lunches and dinners followed the same structure. Every plate looked like something out of a nutrition textbook. And yet, over the years, something unexpected happened. She became increasingly tired. Her digestion was often uncomfortable. She began gaining weight slowly, even though she believed she was doing everything correctly. What went wrong? Eventually, she discovered that many of the foods she relied on, especially certain grains and dairy products, did not agree with her body. Her diet had been perfectly balanced according to general guidelines, but it was poorly matched to her individual metabolism. Once she simplified her meals and removed foods that caused irritation, her health improved dramatically. That experience stayed with me for many years because it revealed something important. Nutritional balance is not universal. It must be personal. Another issue that people rarely consider is how the concept of balance can unintentionally encourage constant eating. Many dietary guidelines suggest including multiple food groups at each meal, and sometimes even in snacks throughout the day. The intention behind this advice is good. It aims to provide steady energy and prevent nutrient deficiencies. But in practice, many people begin eating far more frequently than their bodies actually require. Breakfast becomes a carefully balanced meal. Then a mid-morning snack appears to maintain blood sugar. Lunch follows with another balanced plate. In the afternoon, there may be another snack to keep energy stable. Dinner again contains multiple food groups. Some people even add an evening snack because they fear going too long without nourishment. When eating becomes this frequent, the digestive system rarely receives time to rest. The body spends much of the day processing food rather than repairing tissues, regulating hormones, and maintaining internal balance. Modern researchers often speak about metabolic recovery periods, the time when the body shifts from digestion toward maintenance and repair. If food constantly enters the system, those restorative processes may become less efficient. This does not mean that everyone should eat less frequently. Some individuals truly feel better with smaller meals spaced throughout the day, but the idea that constant balanced meals are universally necessary can quietly disrupt the natural rhythms of hunger and satiety. I also began noticing another strange pattern among people who tried very hard to follow nutritional perfection. They often stopped listening to their bodies. If their body felt unusually full, they might still finish the meal because the planned portions were balanced. If they felt little hunger, they might still eat because the schedule said it was time. If their digestion felt uncomfortable after a particular food, they might continue eating it because nutrition guidelines recommended it. In other words, the external rule replaced the internal signal. But the human body communicates constantly. Hunger, fullness, energy levels, digestive comfort, and mental clarity are all forms of biological feedback. When we override these signals in order to obey a dietary formula, we slowly disconnect from the body's natural guidance. Over the decades, I came to believe that health depends not only on what we eat, but also on how attentively we respond to the body's responses. Another overlooked issue with the concept of perfect dietary balance is cultural context. Around the world, people have developed traditional diets shaped by geography, climate, agriculture, and history. Some cultures rely heavily on grains. Others emphasize legumes. Some consume more fish or fermented foods. Many of these traditional diets supported healthy populations long before modern nutrition science existed. Yet, if we apply one standardized model of balance to every culture, we risk ignoring these historical patterns that evolved over centuries. A diet considered perfectly balanced in one country may not resemble the traditional diet of another region at all. And yet both populations may experience good health when they eat foods suited to their environment and lifestyle. This reminds us that nutrition is not only biological, but also cultural. Even within a single country, lifestyle differences matter greatly. A construction worker performing physically demanding labor all day has very different nutritional needs compared with someone who spends most of the day sitting at a desk. The same balanced meal might provide ideal energy for one person, but excessive calories for another. This is why the pursuit of a universal formula can become misleading. Balance must adapt to activity level, age, health conditions, and daily habits. And then there is the matter of time itself. Living past 100 years gives you the rare opportunity to observe how nutritional advice changes across generations. I have watched foods praised as essential in one decade and criticized in the next. I have seen fats condemned, then reconsidered, carbohydrates blamed, then defended, eggs feared, then welcomed again. Each generation believed it had finally discovered the correct nutritional balance, but science continued to evolve. This does not mean nutrition research is unreliable. On the contrary, scientific progress helps us understand the body more clearly, but it reminds us that dietary knowledge is always developing. When people treat a particular formula as permanently perfect, they forget that our understanding of health continues to grow. What appears balanced today may be reconsidered tomorrow as new evidence emerges. That is why humility is so important in matters of health. After many decades of observation, I reached a simple conclusion. The healthiest approach to eating is rarely extreme precision. Instead, it is thoughtful flexibility. A meal should nourish the body, but it should also respect individual differences. It should contain a variety of natural foods, but not so much complexity that digestion becomes strained. It should provide enough energy for the body's needs without encouraging constant excess. Most importantly, it should allow the person eating it to remain attentive to their own biological signals. In this way, balance becomes something living and responsive, not something rigidly calculated. And that distinction may be the difference between a diet that merely looks perfect on paper and one that truly supports a long, healthy life. So after more than a century of watching people search for the perfect way to eat, what do I truly believe about the idea of a perfectly balanced diet? I believe the idea itself is not wrong. Balance is still one of the most sensible principles in nutrition. The human body needs a range of nutrients to function well. Carbohydrates provide energy, proteins help repair tissues, fats support hormones and brain health. Vitamins and minerals guide thousands of tiny processes inside our cells. A diet that completely ignores balance can certainly lead to problems. But the lesson my long life has taught me is that balance should never become a rigid formula. The real risk appears when people begin to believe that health can be engineered through perfect proportions alone. When eating becomes a mathematical equation instead of a living relationship with the body, something important is lost. The body is not a machine that runs only on numbers. It is a responsive system that changes with age, activity, stress, environment, and individual biology. What nourishes you in one stage of life may not serve you the same way decades later. That is why the most important skill in nutrition is not memorizing rules. It is learning to observe. Notice how your body feels after certain meals. Notice your energy, your digestion, your sleep, your clarity of mind. These quiet signals reveal far more about your true nutritional needs than any universal formula. In my 101 years, the healthiest people I have known were not those chasing perfect dietary balance. They were the ones who ate real food, kept their habits simple, stayed active, and remained attentive to their bodies. Balance helped them, but wisdom guided them. And in the long run, wisdom always matters more than perfection.